Welcome to our first Salon, y'all. My name is Trinice. I use she, her pronouns, and we're looking forward to a really dope conversation today. Before I allow folks to introduce themselves and we run through the program, I just want to kind of share that I'm a professor, right? And I know how annoying it is to talk to people all day, right? To look at people on Zoom, Teams, WebEx, what is it, Cisco, right? There's so many different systems that we use. And we want folks to know that this is a very informal conversation that's guided, right? We have a structure, but we want you to feel free to ask us questions. The way that we've tailored this conversation is towards the end, you'll be able to talk to folks. If you have any questions, share your thoughts, please feel free to also utilize the chat. I see folks checking in, where they're from, sharing their pronouns. So that's the first thing I just wanted to start us off with is that, it's COVID-19, right? And there's a reason that we're on a webinar and we're not in person, right? There's a reason why we're all fatigued, right? In this particular moment. And I don't think it's okay or possible for us to not acknowledge what has happened, right? And the millions of people that have been impacted by COVID-19 and the hundreds of thousands of people that have died right across this globe. So welcome. If you're just joining in, I see people popping in. Again, my name is Trinice McNally. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the creative director for I Support Black Women, which is a new project supported by Virgil Abloh and Off-White. And the program is geared to do many things, but in particular to support the work of Black women organizers, right? And also to build a school for Black feminist politics. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie. She's going to talk to you about some community guidelines and how we're going to rock.
Thanks so much, Trinice. Thank you everyone for being here. So excited to have this conversation and this continued conversation on Black and Asian solid feminist solidarities, and particularly this conversation on immigration, violence, citizenship, and solidarity. So my name is Jamie Swift. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of Black Radicals, and super honored to be a part of this conversation and also to be a part of the I Support Black Women campaign, which is, like Trinice said, helping to raise money to open a physical location in Washington, D.C. for the School for Black Feminist Politics, which is the Black feminist political education arm of Black Radicals. So nice for everyone to be here. I just really want us to ground the conversation. This is, like Trinice said, a safe space. So I ground the conversations with Black Radicals. We don't allow certain things to happen, right? So no racism, ableism, xenophobia, white supremacy, transphobia, we don't allow that here. And if you can't abide by that, the Black Discourse team will, put you out. So we just want to ground that with that too. It's a safe space, and also some community agreements that we can, discuss and agree to. So first of all, there's some words, content warning. Please be clear about the words that you use, and also if you have something to say that may trigger someone, because we don't know what words specifically trigger people because we're all different, but just please pause or say content warning so that others can be aware of what the content that you're saying or the statements you're saying. Also too, I'm just going to go down a list of agreements that we can agree to as a community. So use I statements, impact over intention, be present and take space when you need it. Remember your positionality, be aware of yours and others' experiences, identities, privileges, and oppressions, and how they impact how we all show up. Lessons leave and stories stay, and we will take comfort in silence when it happens. So I hope that we can all abide by those community agreements.
And one thing I didn't add, y'all, I see folks doing it already in the chat, is a land acknowledgement. So where I live in Washington, D.C., it's Pamunkey territory and also Piscataway. And I also understand that we always have to honor the labor and the exploitation of the Black people, right? Enslaved Africans that have stewarded the land, in particular in Washington, D.C., right? A couple hundred miles away from the first arrival of enslaved Africans in 1619 in Jamestown. So it's important that we not only acknowledge Indigenous folks, but also the folks who have also stewarded this land for over the last 400 years. And if folks have anything else to add in the chat in terms of community guidelines, it looks like folks are okay. Feel free to keep dropping your name and also your pronoun. And we are going to move into some introductions of participants. And like I told you, this is a non-academic setting. I have to keep saying that because I'm really sick of them, frankly, right? And that's really important, right, of why this project has been created. We think it's really important that political education is accessible to all kinds of people, right? Off-White is a fashion brand, right? Ran by a Black person, right? There are a lot of contradictions, right, in terms of organizing and capitalism and how we all come to this work. But the thing that we are all grounded in together is that if we are not clear, right, about alignment, we are not clear about the tensions that have occurred, in particular between Black folks, right, and Asian folks, we need to be clear and understand the solidarity. So I'm coming to this conversation not as a person that is a scholar, right, on this particular piece of content. And I think it's really important that organizers and scholars and activists approach conversations with ease and come with an excitement and curiosity about learning, right? Because everyone doesn't know everything. And if we wanted this to be an academic space, we would have did it at our universities, right? That's exactly why we're trying to do this work here, because we understand that fashion, arts, and culture have a role, right? In terms of how we make interventions in social justice. And we don't want to keep talking to the same people, right? Because we know if we do that, we're not going to win, right? So we need to make sure that this knowledge, this education, this discourse, this conversation is continued and it's accessible to all of our folks. Also, big shout out to Black Discourse. They are the folks that are also facilitating this conversation. Please check out their website. There are several videos, podcasts. Check out their Instagram and the creative design. All of it is rooted in shared political values and alignment. And we're all committed to ensuring, like I said, that political education is accessible, right? Because we know we won't win if we keep talking to the same people. So I'm going to jump in and allow the different panelists to self-introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump into some questions. And anyone who wants to go, just popcorn it. And yeah, we'll get started.
All right, what's up, y'all? My name is Nana Brantuo. I am I am based in the DMV area. This is where I was born and raised, two parents from Ghana and Sierra Leone. I am currently teaching at GW. It's a dope course on decolonizing international education. So really getting at what is education as a project, in particular as embedded within international organizations like the UN, the IMF, the World Bank. We get into all the weeds of it. I'm also doing work with the Justice for Muslims Collective in DC. I'm gonna drop their Twitter. I really want y'all to follow them. It's dope work by dope Muslim women in particular who interrogate Islamophobia as it's gendered. And it's just excellent work that they have been doing, in particular in the wake of COVID. I'm writing right now with Amaka Studio, another dope initiative. It's focused on Pan-African womanhood. So I get to profile some dope women, feminist organizers, activists that I know and love and support their work. So that's been really just great work as well. And I'm a PhD candidate. I don't really talk about my university like that. I don't really rock with them like that, but I love my work. I really just interrogate Black international students past and present. It's a really interesting history that goes real far back into the early 1800s and really looking in particular at Black immigrants at HBCUs and Black spaces, creating movements, creating friendships, creating communities, and also addressing tensions. So that's me, and thank y'all for having me.
Yeah, anyone feel free to jump in.
I can go next. It's gonna be hard to follow up on that one, but and I feel like I want to channel your energy because I'm in New York City. I'm from Queens, New York, and I will say I've been working in New York City politics for the last 5 years. And it's funny that you say that you don't really highlight being in academia, because I actually feel the same way in terms of, Asian American Feminist Collective is my organizing space and it's where I do the work that I want to do. But, I also acknowledge I have been working in city government, and the work that I do right now is actually working on COVID-19 and just testing and tracing and the vaccine work there. But there's a lot of, feelings around that too. So and I'm a writer and organizer. I predominantly do AFC work, but also passionate about, where I grew up, Flushing and Bayside, New York. So doing a lot of organizing work in my neighborhood. And yeah.
I can go next also. I thought we were gonna popcorn Julie, but my name, I'm kidding. I'm Salon. I use she and her pronouns. I'm also zooming in from New York City. I live in Upper Manhattan, so up in Inwood. And I'm also a co-leader of the Asian American Feminist Collective and also a secret academic in here, but I'm going to take off that hat fully. I do identify as a historian fully, and that work is really important to me. I'm also a writer, and I do a lot of thinking about gender and sexuality and work and labor and immigration. Yeah, and I'll popcorn it to Trinice.
Perfect. Wow. Wow. The first popcorn so far. Hey, y'all again. My name is Trinice. I use she, her pronouns. I'm originally from the United Kingdom by way of Jamaica, raised in Miami. I serve as the founding director at the University of the District of Columbia. We are the first department of its kind that serves LGBTQ students, undocumented folks, folks with different statuses, and also first generation and formerly incarcerated folks. So yeah, I definitely like to push back on all the academic settings, but I really love the work I do, right? And the students I get to serve, predominantly at HBCU campuses, also a member of BYP 100, the Black LGBTQ Migrant Project, and also the Undocu Black Network as well, and really coming to this conversation in a place of learning and excitement, and also curiosity. And I will popcorn it to TD.
Hi, I'm Tiffany. I use she, her pronouns. I'm joining from Brooklyn or Lenape, unceded Lenape land. And I am a co-founder and co-leader of the Asian American Feminist Collective, along with Julie and Salon. And in my, I guess, sort of career life, I'm a freelance journalist, editor and producer. And I typically cover topics surrounding identity, Asian American identity and issues, race, labor, sex work, etc. All the things. Yeah, and I'm just, happy to be here. Thank you for holding the space for all of us. I'll pass it to Jamie.
Hey y'all, how y'all doing? My name is Jamie Swift. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in Piscataway land, but also known as Chocolate City, still known as Chocolate City. Never forget it, okay? And I think Shay Queen said Chocolate City, yes. So like I said before, I'm the executive director of Black Women Radicals, which is a Black feminist advocacy organization. And we are dedicated to uplifting and centering Black women and gender expansive folks in Africa and the African diaspora. It's hard talking about yourself. It's kind of weird. I'm going to say how I know everyone. So I know Nana because Nana, we work together on the Caribbean feminisms. Like Nana is the brainchild, one of the brain children of the Caribbean feminism series for Black Women Radicals. Trinice, I interviewed Trinice and Nana for Black Women Radicals, and Trinice is just so dope and like runs a whole center. Lord have mercy, right? And just is like amazing. Julie, Salon, and Tiffany, we met because we are co-collaborators on the Black and Asian Feminist Solidarities Project, which is a project that looks to the histories and contemporary struggles for solidarity between Black and Asian feminists. And so, yeah, I'm just happy to be here, y'all. I'm also quote unquote academic, but we ain't gonna talk about that no more, okay? Let's get into the conversation, y'all. Love y'all.
All right, y'all, so we're about to move right into our questions. Like I said, please don't hesitate to use the chat at any time. It's being monitored. You can also hit us up directly, even though we may not be paying attention. So if it is a question that you do want answered publicly, make sure you hit attendees and not just panelists, because we may receive the questions and the folks that may also be sharing the same thoughts or curiosity may not have the opportunity to share that. So Jamie's going to kick us off with our first question. We're going to spend maybe the next 40 minutes or so being in conversation. Think of this kind of like as a fishbowl, right? Like we're all in this little glass, AKA my MacBook right here. And you have the opportunity to watch us, right? Be in conversation. And after that, you have the opportunity to ask us questions, to respond to things, but please utilize the chat and we will be following up with you directly. All right, Jamie, I'll let you kick it off and I'll jump right in.
Yeah, sure. So I guess like what I love to ground conversations is like, how do we get here? How did you come into your feminist consciousness and praxis? And I think that's important to show, like we weren't born feminists, right? Like we had to come into this and get some political education. So if y'all didn't mind sharing, like, how did you come into your feminist praxis and consciousness? That would be cool. And don't be scared. Okay, just go, y'all again. Yeah, don't be scared.
Yeah, I feel like I came into mine feeling like a survivor, sorry, of like patriarchal violence, honestly. You know, I think what really brought me into the work was growing up, seeing the ways that men oppress and, you know, commit violence against women. And so I think whenever the ideas presented themselves to me, you know, because I don't think I necessarily went on a hunt for it, you know. You know, I'm sure I was like grasping at things like bikini kill and like riot girl feminism and stuff like that when I was younger, because those things like appeared to me. But every time I think they appeared to me, I was drawn to them. So the more and more like I came into like my political consciousness, you know, through you know, whatever spaces, sometimes they were in higher education, unfortunately. And then other times, you know, just through connections that I made with other people, that I just continue to like try to learn. And I'm still learning, you know, like we mentioned before, I'm definitely still on my journey. Um, but I definitely feel like I started to really like commit to and identify more strictly as like I'm an Asian American feminist. Which sometimes I want to shove the American part, but you know, you know, that I'm an Asian feminist was, I think, when we kind of all came together for AAFC, you know, most like kind of in the aftermath of the 2016 election and early, you know, 2017. We can talk a bit more about our formation later, but yeah, I would say that that was actually like a much more like concrete, I don't know, whatever. It made it more concrete for me. Yeah, and I'll just cede my time here.
Yeah, I also have a bikini kill connection, actually. I totally feel like I moved to the US when I was 8 from India, and I moved to LA. And I definitely think it took me a little bit of time to figure out that like what I was feeling was not just like racial or cultural dislocation, but like dislocation within some of the ideas of like what gender was supposed to be or like how women were supposed to be. I was raised by a lot of very strong women who nonetheless like, you know, prescribed to some gender roles and like found themselves limited by what other people thought they should and shouldn't be doing. And I think kind of similarly to Tiff, like feeling a lot of anger about that is sort of what got me to my feminism. And yeah, rock and roll and like that kind of like magazine DIY culture was really big for me. I think also articulating why I felt so angry towards a lot of white women in my early life and like why that was like not a culture I felt represented my like womanhood was really formative in sort of like identifying as a woman of color feminist and Asian American feminist, like sort of locating my actual feminist politics is not, you know, a particular kind of like exclusive one. Like that is kind of what felt like an egg cracking open or something to me, to be like, oh, these are my people and like these are my struggles and like this is actually something that I don't have to feel like is a shoe that doesn't quite fit or something. Yeah, I'll cede my time too.
I feel like my feminist consciousness was or praxis was always just present, learned through the women around me, my mother and my stepmother in particular, a lot of Black women educators throughout my life. So many of them, like they're like instances that I can like just recall right now in my mind, right? Because school was a space for me away from a very like, what was an unhealthy space at home. And so like there were so many teachers that would like sort of bring me in and like create space for like caring and loving on me and other, in particular, Black girls, dark-skinned Black girls. And I kind of like viewed that and saw that all the time. It was always modeled in my life. And I remember a time in high school where there was a teacher in particular who took like it was almost like another mother for me, who put, I can't remember what bell hooks book it was, but she put it in my hands, and that's when I was like sort of hooked. I was like, this is it. And I've already seen it, but now it's written, and it's written in a way that I'm like, oh, it's not just us. This isn't just went off, this isn't just my story, it's embedded in Black women's stories across borders, and in particular in this space that I called home in the DMV area. So that was always it. And I think also in more later years, after my time in undergrad, because I feel like one of the things that during my undergrad times, it was just so clearly present, is like women's presence, women, gender expansive folks were so like sort of excluded rather from the curriculum. And I remember taking a whole class on Pan-Africanism and not learning about a single woman. You know, that really shook me to my core. So like going into grad school and also stepping into a lot of advocacy work and working with organizers like Trinice, like so many other folks, really like delving into the praxis of what it meant to be taking on policy work as a Black feminist, a Black transnational feminist. So I'll cede my time.
Can I also just say, could we all keep ourselves unmuted? Because, you know, it's the yeses, it's the affirmations, it's the moments of like, we're all like, yes, yes, and I feel you, yes. So yeah, let's just unmute ourselves so we can, you know, tap into the conversation in a more organic way. Thank you, Nana.
Yeah, I will say that bell hooks also played a formative role for me. You know, I think it's like I didn't actually realize a lot of the oppression or even racism that I faced when as a young person. Like, I feel like in high school, when I first was kind of questioning my sexuality, was when I first had to really think about my privilege, my oppression. And also, I grew up in a very immigrant enclave, you know, like I grew up around Korean immigrant folks. So I was mostly, you know, and like I had that safety until I didn't have that safety anymore, which is when I graduated. And so I feel like definitely like questioning my sexuality in high school was when I first started really questioning everything, because, you know, I was still going to church back then. And I was very, you know, I grew up in a really religious household. So I think that was like the first crack. But then later on, you know, I definitely feel like the first time I felt like my ideas that I could relate to was definitely reading Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde. And I think that was the first time actually seeing anything remotely close to what I have experienced, my life experience at that time. And after reading them, you know, was when I wanted to also look for Asian American feminists, and how I got into, you know, This Bridge Called My Back, which was actually like the anthology with women of color feminists at that time, and was really inspiring to just see people come together like in their feminist identity at that time too.
Thank you for sharing that. I think this is always such a good question, because I think that so many of us have like entered consciousness in different ways, right? Like over the years, like I really appreciate Nana being like, yo, I kind of seen this growing up, right? Like I was really clear about the ways that like Black women in particular like showed up in my life. I feel like similar. I think of like moments of my grandmother teaching me about like Danny of the Maroons, right? And what it meant to be a Black woman in the 1600s leading a rebellion, right? After being like brought to this strange place that she knew nothing about, and the ways that like her legacy has been able to transcend and like serve as an icon, not just in Caribbean culture, but in just in Black culture. But I think the moment when I actually came into consciousness was around the time that I joined my political home, the Black Youth Project 100. And, you know, our organization was created after the George Zimmerman verdict, right? That's a story of like how those 100 folks were in the room and decided that we were going to do something, right? And we were going to be clear that our movement was queer, right? We understand Blackness is inherently queer. And I think that's also the time where I started to really interrogate the ways that I didn't see Black women, in particular, trans folks and non-binary folks, being censored in the same ways that men were, right? So this is a time when I'm like entering the academy, working at, you know, HBCUs, doing a lot of work, like, you know, diversity inclusion, you know, everybody loves inclusion, right? That's what they say. And like, you know, entering movement in a really complicated time where like, yes, we're absolutely out there for Trayvon. We're absolutely out there for Mike Brown and everyone else. But like, what about Sandra? What about Corinne, right? What about all of these other Black women whose stories were never shared? So I think that like my political home has been very important, right, to how I understand myself as a Black feminist, reading texts like Punks, Bull Daggers, and Welfare Queens by Kathy Cohen, right? Like understanding and interrogating the Combahee River Collective and thinking in the ways that like those women, those Black lesbian women who people like deemed unworthy and invaluable, like really kind of curated like everything we actually needed, right? And it just kind of came into fruition in a real way for me. And I started to interrogate the ways that like I was playing in the patriarchy, right? Like I was still in the patriarchy parade, right? Thinking that I wasn't, and really forced me, right, to break up with a lot of the ideas that I kind of got from being at HBCU, if I could be very honest, right? Like
It is what it
buying
is.
in, right, to that respectability and that elitism that really shames like working class folks, really shames international students who don't have the access. And it really kind of caused me to like take a look at myself in the mirror, right? Here I am thinking I'm big time activist. Nigga, no. Steeped in the patriarchy and the elitism. And when I joined, you know what I'm saying? I joined my political home and it was a reckoning, right? To get clear about what my values were and kind of like who I was going to be. So yeah, I love this question.
Preach, preacher, Lord have mercy.
That made me laugh, Jamie, in the chat.
You know, this is so Black when you're like, like you in church or something. But thank you so much for everyone for sharing your perspectives. And for the sake of time, I'll just go to the next question because I think that it's so important because we're talking about immigration, we're talking about citizenship, we're talking about solidarity, we're talking about violence, right? And so just for content warning, the next question we'll be talking about anti-Asian violence, right? And so the next question is, in your opinion, why are we seeing such high rates and instances of anti-Asian violence? And how does this contemporary violence connect to a longer legacy of historical anti-Asian legislation in the US? And if you can, could you please provide some examples to provide context?
Yeah, well, I'll maybe preface by saying that I don't know the one answer. Like us, every time I think about this problem, it's like so tempting for me to approach it literally from that academic angle that we kind of like have committed that we're not going to, because it's a way of like being able to distance from some of the emotional stuff of it, like the messy stuff of it. But in my experience, I think in part it's because we have like a massive untreated mental health crisis in this country. Like people don't feel taken care of and don't have the resources they need to like, on one hand, like contextualize and understand how to like what, you know, when someone says something like the China virus or like scapegoats a community, that can get interpolated in all sorts of ways to all sorts of people. And there's like very little grace that we offer individuals and like very little room to have them feel held. That's like one thing. But I also think that like historically, and thinking as a historian, like there has long been a temptation to locate a problem in a foreign body, and like Asian Americans, Asians in general, well, you can hear my partner tutoring in the other room, but
It's no problem.
Asian Americans like are, I think that are like such a visible foreign body, and there's this constant feeling of like separateness or newness, and somehow no matter how long a community has been there, they are perceived as somehow like a foreign threat. And I think that this happens with like all sorts of racialized bodies, but I can at least speak to my own. Like there is this sort of like where are you from, or like where are you coming from, but also this sense that like a community is changing the sphere, like the scope of what's going on. There's a historian named Eric Tang who wrote a book called Unsettled about Vietnamese refugees in the North Bronx. And he writes about how like the New York Times has basically written the same article about like, there are Vietnamese people in the Bronx. Like, did you know? Every 5 years. And like, you know, there have been Vietnamese people in the Bronx since the 1970s, since like refugee resettlement. Like it's not new, but there is this constant like rediscovery and exotification and like as part of scapegoating, because then we don't have to look at our own dirty laundry, or like America doesn't have to look at its own dirty laundry if there's like a foreign threat that has created it. And I think that is like the historical parallel I see. I think that is a big part of why there's so much anti-Asian violence. Yeah, I don't know if, I'm sure other people have thoughts too.
Yeah, I mean, I would add that, you know, clearly there's been a racialization of COVID as like the China virus, right? And that coupled with the actual like impacts COVID has had on us, right, as a society, you know, whether that is mental health or, you know, poverty. And I feel like, you know, crime or whatever, or yeah, what they would call crime and like violence rises with poverty, right? And that I think that there is, you know, such a like lack of social safety nets that people are, you know, just feeling completely untethered, you know, and that like seeing like the Asian population maybe as like the reason behind it because of the ways that it's been you know, like typecasted, I guess, like in media and stuff, or by, you know, our ex-president slash, you know, his whole administration, and still Republican today. And, you know, there's been even, you know, within like obviously like Democratic leaders and stuff, like there has always been a lot of like like xenophobia, like anti-Chinese sentiment, because, you know, like China, right, as this like rising global power, and, you know, whatever trade wars that they have happening, I think that it's all just like coming to light. I don't think that there's any newness to the violence. I think that right now, it's just once again more visible, you know, like I think that that's always what happens. It's just the hyper visibility of an issue. And then, you know, how that hyper visibility also might perpetuate that violence, right? Like how after every single like horrific event, there's always copycats that happen afterward. And so, yeah, I think that there's like a conglomeration of things, but then also to answer the second question, you know, I feel like America's like, you know, immigration system was like based on anti-Asianness. Like the first, you know, law that closed borders was the Page Act, which was, you know, anti-Asian racism and sexism, because it was specifically targeted to Asian women, mostly Chinese women, under the guise of all Asian women being here for potential immoral or lewd purposes, engaging in sex work for, you know, a number of reasons based on like perpetuated stereotypes, but then also, you know, the fact that there were also no actual jobs available to Asian women at the time. So, you know, Asian women did resort to sex work or were actually like, you know, trafficked into sex slavery. And that, but then like thinking also about like, right, how the US military has like perpetuated also that type of like sex tourism and the sex industries in Asian countries during every single war. So yeah, there's just so much. You know, that's all I'm gonna start with for now, but I'll allow anyone else to answer, or, you know, we can also keep the conversation moving.
I'll also say that with the recent attacks and the violence that's been happening, we have to also acknowledge who's being the most targeted. You know, it is going to be the seniors, like the elders, right? It's going to be, you know, people who, like the Atlanta shooting was targeting Asian women, you know, Asian women at the spa and massage parlors. Like, I think, like in New York City, at least, most of the attacks that we've also been seeing have been much older, like those seniors who are like trying to recycle the cans, you know, like I think there's also a very specific type of Asian American that's being, or Asian immigrants that are being targeted right now too.
I think that's actually a perfect segue, right, for our next question. In our praxis, in a feminist praxis, we know it's imperative that we interrogate those who are more advanced in the marginalization of our communities, right? Like Julie was just saying. When it comes to inequities on immigration, who are the most impacted in our communities? And anyone can jump in.
I wanted to, like, you know, allow
rhetorical, yeah.
Definitely. I mean,
Julie
well, definitely.
No, yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
definitely yeah, sorry. Definitely the poorest of us, those who don't fit within binaries of gender, right? So those who don't fit within like heteronormative images and like just heteronormativity, like so our Black, queer, trans migrants, refugees in particular, those are the most deeply impacted by not just immigration policies, but also welfare policies, anything that has to do with anything in this country are those most deeply impacted, but because they are not the desirable, not just within the larger society, but also within the actual community. They're the least desirable rather within the community. A lot of their issues and their needs are just silenced, despite the fact that these are often the folks who are leading the movement and who are, literally laying their bodies on the line. They're sharing what little capital they have. They're creating spaces to advance the movement and really bring us to what liberation looks like.
Yeah, I was just thinking, or I'm having this thought, like, as our earlier conversation sort of about like patriarchy and the invisibilization of both Black women in texts of Black liberation, even when you are the subject of the conversation, being excluded from them. That is such a unique experience that I think speaks to some of what this problem is too, of like, we know that the white superstructure is not going to protect any of us, right? And it obviously trickles down, like the poorest, the most vulnerable are particularly unprotected. That's true on like a big structural level. But then in community, we have all of these little pacts that we've made over decades and decades, hundreds of years maybe, of how we're going to keep each other safe. And there's like a really reclamatory, exciting way to think of that. And then there's also a like kind of dark side of that, of like, how are we not taking care of each other, and who do we feel comfortable as a community excluding? And I think that's where some of that like class stuff comes in. Like, we're very comfortable excluding people who are working for us, or who are, taking care of our children. Or I know in the South Asian community, there's a huge rift between people who came on H-1Bs and are kind of like skilled migrants and their domestic worker employees, or, wealthy Indian folks who are employing Nepalese women to take care of their children. On some level, we're all South Asian, but that is not quite the identity category that we're building solidarity across. There is real rifts, and there's a sense that we should be able to exploit our own to some degree, and that I think renders people super hyper vulnerable. And of course, like gender nonconformity, not getting married at the right time, not having a certain kind of like, not having certain claims to community protection render you particularly vulnerable, because you don't cease being a racialized person. It's not like suddenly, the white superstructure is eager to take care of you because you're a queer person of color. It's just that you almost relinquish some measure of community protection, and that is hard. I think that's just a thought I was having.
Yeah, and that reminds me of Kathy J. Cohen's The Boundaries of Blackness, HIV/AIDS, and the HIV and the Breakdown of Black Politics. And she discusses how in the Black community, like there's this consensus issues where people can get around, because if we feel as if our livelihoods and our issues are tethered to our race first. And then there's cross-cutting issues where if you don't fit inside this race first masculinist, concept, your issues don't matter, right? So on the issues of gender and sexuality and what constitutes home, if you're a migrant, all sorts of things that is outside of the consensus issues, and we can't deal with that. And that is why you see in the Black community, particularly when it comes to state-sanctioned violence, the dominant foci is on Black cis heteronormative male victims and survivors of state violence, but rarely do people want to talk about Black trans women, queer folks, gender nonconforming folks. And this is not just a US issue, this is a global issue within the landscape of what we talk about state and quotidian violence. And so I think that's why we see those who are most advanced in their marginalization not recognized, even like Nana was saying. We're at the vanguard of movement building. And literally, like, it's us keeping us safe. Like you were talking about Salon, it's because many of us have been pacified and co-opted to repeat the same systems and structures, and thinking that, I don't know if it's our class positions, our societal academic positions will save us, and you will not be saved.
Right. It's even transnationally. Like, I think about what's happening in Ghana, which is not new, but just this vitriol, like this attack of queer folk, the trans community all throughout Ghana, and like the sustainability that we see like transnationally with activists here, with activists back home, trying to create space, because there is this global commitment too in terms of like conforming within white supremacy, within like our governments, whether we're in the host nation or home nation. So it puts you in this very awkward positioning of your relationship to any which state, which is why I think, and so much of my work and my organizing has just been like, let me center this my community, our communities outside of the state and outside of that apparatus, because they ain't shit. Either way, something like the one you came from, the one you're at right now, it's something.
Boom.
One thing I also was thinking about with, I think, I'm not sure who said it. I think Nana, you touched on it. I think Julie did too. Two communities I think of that we don't talk enough about are migrant survivor women. Right? Like as a person that is divorced, that was undocumented, like listening to the horror stories of like other women around me of having to stay in marriages, right? Being trafficked. And because we don't have access, right, to the protections, yeah, VAWA is helpful, but not that really.
Not really.
Right? Like when you don't have the status that you need or the access that you need, where we're talking about an attorney, we're talking about the money to actually pay for the visa, right, to pay for the application that doesn't guarantee you a thing, folks are more likely to stay in abusive relationships, right? Whether that's emotionally abusive, physically abusive, sexually abusive, and the list goes on.
Financially,
so
my God.
I'm really curious, right, about like what that work is going to look like based in the US, because I know there are folks that are doing the work in West Africa in particular around migration, but like we here in the US, when I think of migrant survivors, that's not always a conversation that we even can have because it impacts our status. All right, so that's the community that I'm thinking about. The second one I'm thinking about is folks who are formerly incarcerated, right, or have a particular charge, right, because think about the ways that we're criminalized and funneled into prisons, right? It's usually because we do not have something, right? We do not have access to a thing, right? So what do? We survive, right? And usually those folks are Black migrants, right? What queer, trans in particular, right? When we're thinking about the folks that are deported at high rates and also have to stay in those detention centers. Right. So, it could be as small as that weed charge, right? Or small as a theft charge or whatever the charge is. And now I'm more likely, right, to sit in a deportation center versus even being sent back to my home country that I probably fled from persecution in the first place, right? So how are we thinking about when we're having conversations about abolition, right? People need to also be clear that we're talking about the abolishment of ICE too. We're talking about the abolishment of detention centers because they're one and the same.
Yes.
Definitely. Ooh, listen.
I'm talking a lot, so feel free to like cut me off. But there's these immigration hearings that happened in 1986, the IRCA hearings. And we talk a lot about IRCA because it's the laws that gave us like employment verification mandates and all sorts of, it's like this Reagan, like immigration reform that also extended amnesty to a lot of migrants. So it's a mixed bag, but there's a hearing in there about women who are, or I guess all sorts of migrants are technically being discussed, but they're talking about women who are, migrating as fiancés or on green card visas. And that conversation, reading it, was like so eye-opening to me about the logics of the state and how the safety of women is not really at all, not a priority. They're exclusively as threats, but also how imbricated like the fear of the like coquettish Asian woman who's like tricked a service member into marrying her. And now, these like tropes are in the congressional record. Senators are saying them, like there are people from paid organizations who are sort of like trafficking in these stereotypes, and how closely they're linked to this fear of like Black welfare mothers who are marrying undocumented migrants to share their welfare benefits with. Like it's the same fear articulated in two really like violent ways. And the solution is to force people to stay in marriages if they want their statuses to be honored, to make mandatory waiting periods before you can even get a divorce if you want to keep your green card and not be deported. There are all of these like perverse incentives that come out of the like, exploiting of that fear. And so I think like really looking at those documents sometimes is clarified to me, it's not conspiracy theory, like what we're like, it's real. That's how it's designed.
Absolutely.
And this kind of leads me into our next question, right? So folks are probably like, I'm learning a lot, getting a lot of information. How can people plug in, right? Can you share some of the formations of Asian American Feminist Collective and also some Black migrant-led organizations, maybe some of the missions, the visions, and some of the work that's currently happening, so folks can like plug in and know what website to hit, right? Know who to follow on Instagram and know how to access this information.
I can start with Asian American Feminist Collective. As Tiff mentioned earlier, we formed after the 2016 election and with the rise of the Women's March, just because we were seeing, you know, we wanted to think through what does an Asian American feminist movement look like? What does it mean to be Asian American and a feminist? Like having those type of internal conversations were really important at that time.
Yes.
And so our mission right now is really engaging in intersectional feminist politics, building a feminist public, having the space to explore our own identity, and doing political education and community building and advocacy. So some of the things that we've been working on, we actually just finished our 6-week-long Kundiman, which is an Asian American literary nonprofit. We did a 6-week writing workshop with them. We're going to be publishing a Asian American feminist anthology with the writers that we've been working with. We also do a lot of political education around, you know, cop-free communities. We recently did an action on after the violence that's been happening. There's been calls from Asian American electeds and leaders to fully fund this Asian hate crime task force, giving more money to NYPD. So we were trying to, you know, raise awareness about why that is not the way to go, why that is not a good idea. And we've also made a bunch of zines. I think Salon worked on a recent zine, you know, the COVID-19 zine. I don't know, Salon, do you want to share a little bit about that? I think Salon and Tiff both worked on that.
Yeah, Tiff, you can talk if you want to. I've just been like, I feel
Yeah.
monopolize-y. I'm like chatty today. But yeah, the COVID zine was a really great opportunity for us to work with a lot of folks thinking about like contagion and epidemics and racialization, and also what we can learn from community activists who've kind of like come up with different forms of care, be it pod mapping or kind of like thinking outside of alternatives to calling the police, but also our like kind of disability rights community and folks who've been thinking about what does it mean if your whole life is not leaving the house and that's normal for you, and like what kinds of strategies have those people created. Tiff, I don't know if you want to say more. I'm kind of dropping resources in the chat, like slapdash, sorry.
Got it.
Yeah, I don't know what to add. We all do a lot of different things. Because, you know, as you can tell, we come from like different sectors and we all have our like different passion points. So basically just engaging in Asian American feminism broadly, creating a feminist public through different ways, a lot of political education work. And I think the most important thing is kind of just like also creating like just a space for us. You know, as Julie mentioned, that, you know, we came up around the time of like the Women's March, but it was not in collaboration with them. It was because, you know, we once again felt like there was a marginalization and tokenization of, you know, Asian women, queer people, trans people within the like mainstream feminist movements that were happening at the time. And, you know, what do, you know, we do whenever we feel that, you know, we create our own spaces. So, that's why it's been like so transformative, I feel like, for me to just be in a space that was explicitly for and like by Asian feminists. Because that was just something that I lacked completely before. You know, there are Asian women's spaces, but some of them are very milquetoast, you know. I will say that. And like, yeah, you know, how y'all have been talking about like HBCUs and stuff, like they are spaces, right, for sometimes like that budding, emerging, you know, like activism from within you, right? You're like, okay, I do care about like my issues. How can I plug in? You find like a national org or something and find out that it points you a lot. And then you're like, I need to create what, you know, the space that I want to be in because it doesn't seem to actually exist.
I feel all of that. Nana, I saw that you dropped a couple in the chat. Do you want to share some? I can share. I can talk about the Undocumented Black Network, y'all. Really dope organization that centers the needs of currently and formerly undocumented Black migrants, policy work down to direct service, down to organizing, and have been getting into some base building, and also political education. BLMP is an organization that centers the experiences of Black LGBTQ migrants. We are a transnational organization, so we are organizing across borders. We don't believe in borders. We do a lot of deportation defense work that has actually been very successful in partnership with other organizations like UBN and the Haitian Bridge Alliance. But we also provide direct service resources and have been getting into the research field because Black LGBTQ data, right, is very slim when we're thinking about migrants. And if we want to shift policy and burn down these borders, we're going to have to get the data that we need to be able to do it and shift conditions.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. In the chat, y'all, I dropped links for those organizations that Trinice shared about and others as well that do work around the country, locally, and also across borders. Haitian Bridge Alliance in particular has done a lot of great work, in particular documenting the experiences of African, Caribbean, Latin American, or Afro-Latin American migrants at the US-Mexico border, and did work in leading a delegation, I think, from the CBC, amongst others, to actually go and witness the conditions of Black migrants who are not just traversing like that physical terrain, but also anti-Blackness as it exists in Mexico and the United States across borders at the border. So doing really significant work. There's also the Black Alliance for Just Immigration that has also done work in publishing a number of reports that capture the data on this very particular immigrant group that is erased just historically, despite having presence here since the 1700s as migrants. And so a lot of important and significant work there, in particular gendered reports talking about the experiences of Black immigrant women, undocumented women. African Communities Together also does great work, in particular in the New York metro area, focusing on African immigrants. There's a great report that they did that focused on African hair braiders and barriers they have in terms of licensure, and something that's not talked about often, right? Like, because people just think of the hair braider, they don't think of them as being undocumented, or don't think about their circumstances and their status and how they're able to exist in this country and maintain their income, in particular within all these different, like, all kinds of license for everything, structure for everything, in particular for poor people. When, you got all kind of, I'm sorry, I just be thinking about these things, these barriers in comparison to like just the larger scheme of things. Like we had a trash ass president who evaded impeachment, like, you know what I'm saying? Barriers for everyday people. But like, definitely check out these organizations. I have been blessed and honored to work with all of them really in like just research and advocacy, and just also doing work across communities as well. So make sure to do that, because we also need that support. And I think that's one of the things that's also significant about their work, is that they've also done work with Asian communities and Asian immigrant organizations as well, because we both as communities face this erasure and also this, this model minority, in particular in media, and like even I think even back to like shithole countries and the response to say that Africans are educated and this and that. Why is that significant? We're here, we're migrants, we're facing circumstances here and at home as a result of militarism of the United States and imperialism. Making space for these diverse like experiences that we have as Black and Asian immigrants is so significant to my work and the work of these orgs and the work that we're all doing here.
I thought, oh, sorry.
No,
I just thought I would shout out Flushing Worker Center, who's been organizing with the Ain't I a Woman campaign, which is currently going after CPC, the Chinese American Planning Council. So this is some Asia on Asian violence right here that I'm talking about, by the way. But where they've been exploiting for decades, home care workers who are mostly, migrant, Asian and Latinx women, and also some men. But that they're right now trying to get back pay from CPC. They're trying to end the 24-hour workday, because currently in New York City, there's a precedent that home care workers work 24-hour shifts, but they're paid only for 13 of those hours. So there's just like a lot of, worker exploitation happening right now. And yeah, Ain't I a Woman campaign is doing a lot of work around trying to amplify these issues and demand protection for these workers.
Ooh, one thing I will say about Nana is Nana knows everybody, and Nana's the plug for everything. I've never met a person that knows everybody, literally. But thank you. You dropped that list. I was like, boom, baby. There's no excuse now. You got to go to that list, right? But no, thank you so much, Saloni, like Julie, Tiffany, Trinice, all the campaigns, the link to organizations and political education. Like, here are the receipts. Yes, you have the receipts. We sent them to you. So. But I do want to ask one more question, and then we're going to move into the Q&A. The time went by kind of fast, y'all.
Yeah.
It always does that, right? But I really want to talk about the Black and Asian Feminist Solidarities Project, because we always cooking things up, y'all. But I really want to talk about the start of the project and kind of like what that means for us and as we grow in our solidarity with one another. So it's kind of weird. I'm asking about the question about
you're like, tell me our story again. Tell me about us.
Yeah, let's talk about it, y'all. Let's talk about it. So how do we get here?
Well, you reached out.
Yeah, I think when I think about last year, which is so wild that it was like last year, like that COVID-19, like first of all, I was like, COVID, I'm going out for my birthday. What you talk about? I didn't even really understand the magnitude until it happened. Yeah. And I was talking with my friend, she lives in Harlem, she's Vietnamese, and we're on a group chat, and she's like, I haven't gone out in days. And I was like, why? Like, I mean, at least, get some fresh air, because everyone's cooped up in the house and, all sorts of things. And she's like, no, because I'm afraid to go outside because of the, Trump and rhetoric around China virus and like the hate crimes that were happening. And I just was just like, wow. So I knew about obviously like Black communities being disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 and just like within the healthcare sector in general, like, all sorts of things and across sectors in society. But I was prompted when she said that to reach out to the Asian American Feminist Collective. First of all, I saw the zine and we followed each other on Twitter. And I'm like, I went on y'all's website. I was like, wow, they popping, right? And so also I had a conversation with, I was like, wow, I gotta speak with them, but also the conversation with Erica Huggins and Barbara Smith when I interviewed them, and they pushed me to, I think it's important for us to have autonomous spaces, like Tiffany, you were saying, like it's important for Black feminists to have autonomous spaces, it's important for Asian American feminists to have autonomous spaces, but they pushed me to be like, what are you doing cross-racially, right? Mm-hmm. And they were like, you don't necessarily have to work with white women immediately, right? But what are you doing? And so I'm really glad the team said yes, because I was kind of nervous, right? Mm-hmm. Because I didn't know how it was going to be received. But then it just like, we in here now. So yeah, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it more. Like how have y'all how have we learned about solidarity with one another?
I feel like I realized how powerful it is just to even see solidarity in action. I feel like before even our project, I really don't feel like I've seen that much cross-racial collaboration, building, just even recently, right? Like just in my lifetime, I'm sure like there were other before I don't know. But anyways, what I'm saying is I feel like it was just so powerful to just see it in action, and just like even having the conversation, it was scary because, it's like, we don't know, what is going to happen, right? Like we don't know each other. We haven't worked together necessarily, but I think there was this level of, it's such an important conversation that needs to happen. And then, ballooning into the Asian American Writers Workshop project and all of the responses after that, I think it just really reaffirmed how much it's needed. And there's so much that intersects too that you don't get to think about until you're actually in conversation, right? So I think that was really interesting for me.
Yeah, definitely. I was scared. Go ahead.
Before we had our Instagram live conversation, Jamie had called us and we all had a little like conference call, and all of us got off the call and we're like, whoever this is, we have to work with her because she's so like we really did have a call after about your energy and like your genuine desire to talk with us and like not instrumentalize the relationship. I think that so often, like we've taken meetings where it's sort of like, oh, like we can work with these people, or like, what can we do? Like it'll be one event. But it seemed so rooted in actually wanting to build something that was different and about like listening to each other and like having, I wouldn't even say that we have had like messy, difficult conversations in our relationship, but being willing to hold space for those conversations, because anyone who has ever talked about Black and Asian solidarity in a public space knows that from both sides, the like Asian side, certainly I can speak to, there is a lot of like pushback or a lot of like fear or a lot of anxiety, and it feels like you're kind of going out alone into a space where you might say the wrong thing and you don't want to, and you don't want to do more harm than good. And you just made it so clear, Jamie, that you were like in it to actually have a conversation and not to like be seen having a conversation. And that felt really important and like vital. So thank you.
Listen, it was great. Listen, we already talked about this, but I've gotten pushback from Black folks like, why are you working with the Asian community? They don't do anything for us. And I'm like,
of course you did, yeah.
Like I be getting like messages. I'm like, why are y'all, and not understanding the long legacies of history that we have organizing with one another. So yeah, Tiffany, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the project goes, I feel like it's just really like reaffirmed, my commitment to cross-racial solidarity, especially feminist solidarity. I feel like also through our project, I was introduced, well, actually this was even before the actual project launch, but when we did our Asia Society like book club with Dr. Margot Ghazala-Ray, I feel like my relationship with her that has like blossomed out of that has also like, been such a like an affirmation and like my feminism and my ideals, and like I've learned so much through it. And also want to shout out other co-conspirators of mine, Kate Zen, SX Noir, and TS Candy, who I collaborated with to create this ebook, this zine that was all by like New York City-based sex worker organizers. Called But I Am Here. It's butiamhere.org. But anyway, that was just a plug. Unfortunately, it's on Amazon. I'm sorry. But yeah, I think that I think that, yeah, bringing it back to like also the like topic of like migration and stuff. I feel like it's like, working, I think, transnationally and like across, I mean, intergenerationally and transnationally, like through the work with like, Black and Asian feminist solidarities, and then also through these like feminist dance parties that I go to with Dr. Margot Ghazala-Ray, DJ More Love and Joy, and like being in conversation, right, with your co-conspirator Neri Zapata from BLMP, like I think just like keep continuing to have these conversations and like learning from one another, and just like really committing to like, yeah, being in conversation and just in collaboration, like Jamie, you said it best, like sometimes they be hating, but we stay uniting, right?
Yes. In the conversation we had, it was like, they be hating, but we stay uniting. Yes. Okay.
Listen, it's necessary, right? Like in the grand scheme of things, because, people could quote whoever the fuck or say whatever. We could talk about these systems and structures that we're embedded within, imperialism, white supremacy, all of this shit. To disentangle from this, to like bring this shit down, is going to take so much work. And it's going to take all of us. And it's going to be lifetime's work. Like if you're in it for life. Not only are you in it for life, you're in it to like bring other people in, to mentor folks, and to also know when to step out, because some people also don't want to let go and like pass on the torch. Like, but this is work. And it's going to take time, and we need community. You know, I think like sometimes people want like the end all framework that's going to like ultimately hit it where it's hard. But this is like centuries in the making, and we continue then in our like getting to know each other across communities and being in solidarity with each other. It is the reality. We're all embedded within this, and that means that we're going to have some tough ass fucking conversations, and that's okay. That's something that I'm learning to live within. Like I've always been about that, you know. Like, listen, your girl been immersed in diaspora wars before that shit was on Twitter. You understand? Like, it is what it is. We're gonna get in the weeds and the mess of it. We've been miseducated about each other purposely. Right? Education has always been used by a tool of the state. So like, let's just, you know, I think for me, it's significant for us to be working together, talking together, strategizing together. We're going to be in it for some time. And that's what I really appreciate about this space and y'all's work, and just being here and just thinking through what solidarity continues to mean.
Definitely not. And how do we have these hard behind conversations and show each other grace? In the process, and we might fail at it, right? And like, how do we pick up the pieces even when we don't show up at our best? So yes, Nana, you got Samuel.
Yeah, Nana, now you know us too. You know everyone, including us three plus.
Nana know everybody. Nana know everybody.
Knows everybody. Oh
now I see why everyone wants to. Everyone's like, I gotta know Nana.
A hot commodity.
That was
Y'all funny as shit. I'm just trying to get free. We just trying to get free, boy. And it's like for real, like all of us have been in the midst of it too. It's people we've met and known and seen in the movement and the academy that ain't really invested in what they said they invested in.
No.
And so I'm really just trying to be working with people that trying to like, let's get us to that. Cause like,
yo, where's my MLK church fan? You know, in the church, how they had like, where is that at? Cause
I'd like to say after Jamie said they be hating, but we be uniting, she amended it to they be lying, but we be uniting. There was a whole,
we have a whole dissertation.
They're lies that we have to,
But I also want to say that, like, I also get it. Like, I understand the animosity that you're met with sometimes, right, by like working with Asian American feminists. You know, because like, you know, we've gleaned on it, but yeah, there's obviously like there is real like, you know, Black and Asian like tension or conflict that has happened historically. You know, we might have some more context, right? Not everyone has that context, and I think that Jamie, you said it best on like an interview that we gave together once. But you know that you know, it is all kind of about like education at the end of the day, where it's like if you're able to like have a conversation and like really get at the root of the issue, then I think there will be more understanding. I think that it doesn't mean that like magically, right, everyone is on the same page. I'm not sure I understand.
Sorry. Series like solidarity, I'm not sure that I understand.
Yeah, and that, but also that, you know, a lot of it comes from also, right, still coming back to migration, that so many like Asian people were able to migrate here under these, what was it, like the H1 visa or whichever one that H1B visa, right, that was basically just for like, you know, professionals and like, you know, people with higher education and yeah, people from like quote unquote like skilled labor like sectors, and that and so that has perpetuated, you know, this like model minority myth that, you know, all Asians are high earning, you know, East Asian people who like chose to be here or whatever, when, you know, at the root of it, there are many people, right, who are like forced to migrate. And a lot of people don't choose to like immigrate here, including, you know, people who are Asian, right? There are plenty of like, you know, like Asian people who live in poverty, they're forced into migration because of, you know, right, global imperialism and wars that have like decimated their own economies, like people who are forced here through like, you know, trafficking, through, yeah, I just wanted to like point that out, that it's like, it is because we're all coming from like such different levels of understanding at first, And then also we all have like our own histories and how that like roots the way that we see, right, like who the oppressor is and like who is like a like comrade or whatever. And that, you know, I understand that we don't all have even footing, and that I am just always grateful for anyone who is like willing to, you know, right, reach an olive branch and like have the conversation and yeah, just get into it. And yeah, solidarity in action, right?
Right.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, so I can't believe we have only like
15 minutes.
Yeah, I know. So thank you so much, everyone. Like this conversation is so fun. And so I think, Tiffany, like your point goes into like one of the questions from an anonymous attendee. They asked, does anti-US imperialism inform your feminist approach to immigration? And if so, how? Since immigration is the result of interventionist war and economic collapse and global North neocolonial economic policies, leading to the deep inequality between the global North and South that lead to people immigrating for better conditions.
Come on, question.
I know. I'm like,
Right. So you answered the question.
I
Sorry.
know, exactly. I feel like your answer was a really great answer to that question. Yeah. I kind of want to let someone else go.
Yes, I think that anti-imperialism has to inform like everything that we do to some degree, because even if it is not a frame that is like front of mind, it is shaping the conditions of like the world we're organizing in and talking about, how we like even see each other. Like some of the stereotypes we've talked about, like those are war stereotypes that have come from, you know, like a long legacy of colonial occupation. And it's always interesting to me, like as a person from a formerly colonized place who is now like, you know, living in a colonized place as a settler, there is like an interesting thing that happens about like how you find and articulate belonging in a place. And often I find that like diasporic people, like when I go to English spaces, I feel my racial identity differently than when I talk with this accent in New York City. Because I'm like more able to pass as like an American in New York, and I feel less, I don't know, I'm kind of saying a messy thing here, but I guess I'm just saying colonialism is like so important as a frame, and structures kind of what you were talking about earlier, Tiff, too. Like, I don't know anyone who like wants to leave their homeland and want, like, even if you're coming on an H-1B to make a ton of tech money or something. Like, I know so many people like that who are watching their parents and grandparents in India, like, be surrounded by coronavirus right now, who cannot get back home. And it feels like crushing and scary. And I don't know that like money can actually make that better on some level. Of course, it makes some things better, like it makes some things easier, but like there is a transnational loss and like grief that this moment has made so clear to me, even as I rail against like some things that I think like imperialism is at the heart of that for sure.
Absolutely. And I think for at least for in terms of organizing as well, a lot of the work that I have done is transnational and across borders. And I think a lot of that is modeled, in particular, a lot of feminists, Black feminists and Asian American feminist spaces as well, because there's that recognition of the different spaces we're coming from, the way we're entangled within imperialism, the way we're entangled within colonialism, the way the United States has been intervening and occupying and invading many of our nations and regions for like decades, centuries even. So that's always been so critical and so vital to the analysis in which I bring to the work. And also just even like my research and focusing on education, international education in particular, because in particular, when we look at educational migrations to the US thought of higher education as a weapon, an intellectual weapon. There are a number of fellowship programs that they had that were specific to cater to and sort of breed the ideal leader that will follow in line with the United States. I mean, if you look at declassified CIA files, there's documenting and like espionage that focused on like Latin American, Caribbean, and African students, not just in the United States, but in Cuba and also in the USSR. Like there's always been a deep investment of this country in meddling in our affairs as migrants, but also as people, like whether we choose to settle or we choose to return. So that's always like really central to how I look at the work and also see how that is like general like model across immigrant communities, racialized communities in this country. It looks different and functions differently, but education has been a really interesting space to engage the state. And it's very racialized, it's very oppressive, very fucked up policies and actions.
Mhm.
Annie, you just actually transitioned us right into the question from the audience. I was like, wow, Nana, how did you know? What are all of your thoughts on higher education? And how should we make sense of it in 2021 and moving forward?
Well, just recently finishing up my graduate program at an HBCU, and I'm really starting to see how the ivory tower will not save us.
Okay.
They will not save us. And I think for Black people who've been barred from having access to education, when we even look at the constructions of certain schools like HBCUs, what were the morals and values that are the blueprint or shape these institutions? And a lot of our institutions were created by white people. Oliver O. Howard created Howard University. He was a white man.
Right, you know? And our fucking mascot is the damn animal that he loved to fucking kill, the bison.
A bison, right? And so because listen, you know, and Trinice knows too. And so it's like, we look at like several people who went to HBCUs and in our canon, and they're prolific, right? But many of them were not recognized until they died, or they were destitute, or they were sick, or if they did not play along with the respectability political game, they were ostracized, right? And this is at a Black university. And so I can name you several, like Trinice can talk about it. When we talk about Lucy Diggs Slow, and I'll let Trinice talk about Lucy Diggs Slow. When we talk about Pauli Murray, when we talk about Kwame Ture, Zora Neale Hurston, we can the list goes down the line of
you don't know.
And yes, and so academia, my PhD won't save me. And so that's why my community education is so important. And even at the HBCU I go to, the architecture is like literally to the back of the community, right? And so how do we talk about class positionality and higher education, and who are we serving, who are we not serving? And so we need to form our own community building, our own community spaces, get the education out there.
Absolutely.
This is such a hard, this is just always like, I feel like I'm always sitting in contradiction, right? When someone asks me about, you know, higher education as a migrant, right? That was the way I was able to stay in this country. I just went to school. I was like, I don't really want to get a graduate degree, but, you know, I get to stay in the country, right? So I think there's this weird positionality that Jamie just offered around class, but also like expectation that's like deeply rooted in anti-Blackness and white supremacy that we also have to contend with our own migrant families, right? That like, that is actually how we're bred. And you will go to school and you will do this and you will do that and you will become this thing for our family, right? And it's a hard contradiction to sit in, knowing that it doesn't actually matter that Jamie has a PhD or I have this or this and that. That doesn't actually guarantee a thing, right? So like I think we need to really be honest. I'm really honest with the students I have in ways that I think could be harmful to my career. We'll see how it goes. But I'm like, you don't have to do this shit, actually. You really don't have to do this. And that's why we need the School for Black Feminist Politics, right? Because if people can access the political education and the resources they need to shift material conditions, what the hell do we need $200,000 in debt for a degree? Still work at the bank or at Walmart, right? Like that, we could have did that without it and got a lot more for it. So I feel like I sit in a hard contradiction and I see the value, but the value is really steeped in classism and respectability, the ability to move through the world in a particular way, right? And like, as a person that works in academia, I sit in that contradiction in a very like complicated way, but also understand that like people, especially people of color, had always had to navigate survival in ways that have, you know what I'm saying, really tugged at the contradictions and the values that we hold. So I think that's my response, and I'm really curious about how y'all are feeling about the question.
I have one thought, which is that I feel very much the same as you, as like my PhD is not going to save me. In fact, getting my PhD makes that clearer and clearer to me every day, because it's an experience of like being able to analyze the boot that's coming down on you really well. Like I can see what's happening as it's happening, and it doesn't feel good, right? Because I know it. Like I'm not going into it ignorant or like not. So that is a unique and shitty thing about this. And recently I've been like thinking about like, is it higher education that I hate, or these ways that it's been like commodified and sold to people, and like their little fiefdoms of personality, even among the like radicals we're told to respect, and like dynamics that allow people to abuse each other. Like I can, whatever, there's a whole litany of things, but I do love talking about books and ideas, and the idea that that can only happen in some places is what has driven, I like didn't like any of my jobs until I was able to like sit around and talk about books. And even when I'm fighting with like white men in my class, I'm getting something out of it. Like that's what makes me feel a fire, is like reading about and talking about ideas, and like feeling like I'm able to write truth to power. Like we've all kind of described liking our work. So I think there needs to be space for that. Like I want there to be space for people to spend years and years researching something that not that many people think they care about. Like I do think there's like value in that. And school gave me an inner life. Like it gave me a capacity to appreciate novels and like go to an art museum and spend an afternoon there and feel many things. I'm not saying that it's like some experience of transcendent joy that is not without complication in those spaces, but like it has allowed me to ask questions just for the sake of asking them. And growing up, I didn't always feel like I could ask questions just to like contemplate them. There had to be a reason or a practical thing that was tied to it. And so something about getting a humanities degree has given me permission to act like I'm, like there's something, and I would feel that all the time when I came home, like, who do you think you are? Or like, what do you think these questions are? Like, they're not relevant. You're in your ivory tower, you're in a cloud, like real people have real problems. That's all true, but being able to ask those questions felt like freedom to me also. So I just kind of want to make space for all of that.
Yes.
Absolutely. And the spaces that we make while we're in these institutions, like Trinice, I think about you, the work that you do at your center with your students, like that is like truly probably some of the most liberatory space they've ever been and engaged in. Like, honestly, like for real, like those experiences, I think many of us, I think of my own experience in college, like as first gen college student coming from working poor family, not knowing much of anything, how to navigate it, what I needed, like, and thinking of those spaces where I felt freedom, where I learned things. I was like, shit, like this has changed my life and my viewpoint on so many things. And I think we reproduce that as well. I think that's significant. There is something within higher ed that does keep me there.
Yes.
Despite all the bullshit, because everywhere you go, nonprofits be bullshit. Everywhere there are people in a movement within movement politics that are bullshitting. The media is bullshit. Writing space can be bullshit. All of it, right? Because these places mirror the larger society we in. Okay. I've been a Black woman that's worked in multiple spaces and have dealt with misogynoir in all of those spaces, even the spaces that said they wanted us to get free. So for me, it's like, where can I create a space where I can create an experience for myself and for others where they feel like they can see themselves. And that we can also just get access to a lot of these tools, these resources, these skills, these artifacts. Like, honestly, some of this shit, boy, I just want to get this article, get all these articles, get all these books, make copies, hold on to them, because that's what I do. That's what I do, because they got paywalls on everything. Like, white supremacy is not a game, like, for real. So for me, it's like, while I'm in this mug, even though I can't stand these bammers, I'm gonna get what I can and get it to the folks that need to get it. And that's just where I'm staying right now.
And that goes into like, Nana, I mean, what everyone was saying goes into like why the School for Black Feminist Politics was even started, why Black women radicals was even started, because I study a very unique subfield at an HBCU, and it's the only place in the world where they teach Black politics, or you can major and minor, in Black politics at that HBCU. And like Nana said earlier, how can we talk about Black politics and not talk about Black trans women, Black queer folks, Black, like even cis Black women? Like there was nothing, right? And gender expansive people. And so that is why Black women radicals was started, but also why the School for Black Feminist Politics was started last year in October 2020. And I just want to be frank, I was tired of my friends, whether they were in academia or not, getting shitted on, because I know so many brilliant Black feminists, and it's like, you're studying Afro-Austrian women's radical political struggles, and these people are not taking you seriously? Or we're not taught, like, I mean, it's so much. And so that is why the School for Black Feminist Politics was started, to empower Black feminists and Black feminisms, and to expand the frame of reference of Black politics through the power of Black feminism. So if you could please donate and support, please, to open the school. And we're looking to own. I mean, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Harriet's Bookshop in Philadelphia, but she's renting, and she said renting is a form of sharecropping. And it is, because if you're too radical in a space, they will boot you out. We would like to own and reclaim spaces in Chocolate City, because we're tired of our people being displaced in a city that they built. And that's rightfully theirs. And yes, we acknowledge Indigenous communities as well, but really recognizing the power of Black reclamation and resiliency in Washington, D.C. So please support the school. This is where we get busy. So yes. But yeah, go ahead, Trinice. I'm sorry, I want to let you end. Let's honor Trinice, y'all, because she's the creative director of the campaign. I know I didn't want to, I know I'm probably making you embarrassed, but I just want to honor you, Trinice, because you're really popping and you do so much, and you're so gracious. So thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you so much, Jamie. We did not talk about that. I appreciate it. Just wanting to say thank you to all of you. This has felt like just a conversation that I would be in my living room with Prosecco, right? Like we would just be talking and like just being together in the most communal way. And I hope one day we could do that. So rain check that. I got vaccinated. Don't know if that's good or bad.
Me too.
It might help.
I am in my living room. We just need you and Prosecco.
Yeah.
Perfect. I have a deck.
I'm gonna bring some rum, y'all.
Ooh.
I want me some Ray and Nephew personally.
Not me, please. But just thank you, like all of you, for your brilliance. I'm hoping that folks, was on this call tonight, like who have never heard of this content, right? Don't know who any of us are, don't know the organizations, right? That's actually the goal of this project, that I support Black women, right? Being really clear that political education is important, and we're using fashion, arts, and culture as a vehicle, right? That's why Virgil said, yes, of course I'm gonna support this idea. Do what you want, do what you need to do, right? So you're gonna see a lot coming from us. In May, we're kicking off our next conversation. And then July, we have a really big announcement. We're gonna host another Defend Black Women March that folks will have an opportunity to learn about. But just thank you to all of you who were able to make it. You'll also be able to access this on the Black Discourse page. You can follow Black Women Radicals, follow Black Discourse, follow all of these really bomb speakers that were here tonight to learn more about their work, to learn more about their life. And we just say thank you. Please keep in touch with the campaign. It doesn't matter how much you give to the School for Black Feminist Politics. What's important is that you give. I see a lot of people commenting about, pushing back and offering critiques around academic spaces. Well, this is exactly why we're creating this school, right? This is going to be a non-academic space that's committed to deep radical study, right? Where degrees don't matter, right? It's actually the information that you access to shift and improve material conditions for marginalized people. And that is the business of this work that we're doing. And just thank you so much. Do you all have any events coming up that people can follow you? Anything coming up that we want to share with folks so they can plug in? Yeah.
Well, we do have another column coming out in our Black and Asian Solidarities column. That's for sure be there. Yeah.
Let's drop the Eventbrite for our event next week too. Actually, I don't even know where it is.
Oh yeah.
And also we have on May 4th a Asian American feminist teach-in on imagining cop-free communities. So just in response to, of course, what's been happening with the anti-Asian violence and the calls for hate crime legislation and funding for Asian hate crime task force. So yeah, some education around that issue. I know Salon is going to be on a Why Not Yang panel if anyone's interested in the race.
New York City politics.
Yes, New York City politics. You could just DM me and we could talk about that too. I'm happy to.
So
I'm
slide
always
in her
open.
DMs, slide in her DMs.
Open invite. Yeah.
Consent, with consent, of course. With consent.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
thank you all so much.
Thank
Keep
you all
dropping
for
hints.
having us. This has felt like such a lovely space. And like, Trinice, you said this at the beginning, but like, I'm just trying to not be on Zoom most of the time. And this was
Okay.
like not draining. It was like really lovely and nourishing. So I appreciate it. I think we all appreciate it.
Yeah, it was real lit. Thank y'all so much for having us. I shared some links in the chat, so I write as well. And this summer I'm writing with the Maka Studio. I really love the platform, and I'm going to be like touching on African diaspora feminists and organizers and their different projects. So definitely keep up there. They're also having a free festival, virtual festival, May 2nd to 4th that centers Black Pan-African womanhood. There are sessions on mental health, fashion, books, reading, just politics, just all the different things, all the different parts of our life. And it's going to be really dope.
Wow.
So check it out.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I know I will.
That's
Okay.
so great. Yeah, and one more thing, sorry, tomorrow Black Men Radicals will be having an Instagram live with Brianna Baker on protecting Black girlhood. Brianna Baker is the founder and executive director of Justice for Black Girls. So we're just gonna honor how we can, or discuss how we can protect Black girlhood at this time.
Thank you for that. Thanks y'all so much. Hope to see folks soon. We have your email addresses. So folks that have registered, we're going to keep following up with you to ensure that you know about the events and everything that's happening. And we want y'all to have a good evening and be safe.
Thank you. It was lit.
Thank y'all. Yeah, it was lit, man. Thank y'all for having me.
Thank you so much.
Everybody,
Thank
let's
you,
stay
Black
connected.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, Black Discourse.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Sunlight, sunlight, sunlight.